All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be looking at the Miami Hurricanes defensive revamp, new defensive coordinator Corey Hetherman, and then some of the transfers and returning talent they have, and can they get back to competing at a high level in 2025? And you look at the coaching staff, obviously led by Lance Guidry last year, underperformed significantly. In ACC play, they allowed almost 31 points per game, 363 yards per contest. Total defense and yards per game and all those numbers were inflated against weaker competition. But in conference play, they struggled significantly. Nick, you are alongside me all year long making predictions. Game week of the game against Georgia Tech, I picked Miami to lose because I thought the defense would let them down, and I picked them to lose to Syracuse as well because of this D. And that's exactly what happened. They were no good really at all throughout the season. You've seen it in the bowl game as well. Could barely get off the field. It was just a disaster, and it got worse week after week. Even seen players, having altercations on sidelines in the bowl game. So that shows you where this unit was come the end of last season, after they were pretty much costing Miami an opportunity at winning a national championship because they had a quarterback on the other side who could have beat anybody in the country, Nick, and this defense held them back significantly. So Guidry gets the axe. Hetherman comes in from Minnesota. Only 1 year with the Golden Gophers. Ran a top 10 defense, though, in the Big Ten there. He was at Rutgers under Schiano as a linebackers coach the 2 years prior. So he's a pretty good track record over the last couple of seasons. He's been all over the place. Still a relatively young cat here. He played quarterback, back in 2003 to 2005. So this guy, he's got a great understanding of the game of football. He's coached at numerous different positions, but he is now the full-time defensive coordinator for Miami. And, the things he's going to look to do are install a 4-3. That's going to be the scheme. It's going to, start off aggressive blitzing. He loves to stop the run, greatly physical approach. And that's what Miami really struggled with last year, was multiple things. The stopping the run was tough as well. They have a greatly talented defensive line, and they should have been elite against the run, and they should have been phenomenal rushing the passer. And they were still good at, generating sacks. They did have, 36 of those. That's one of the higher marks in the country. But this D-line, Nick, they should have been putting on a clinic weekly, and they just did not do that at all, and that leads to a massive change with a new defensive coordinator.
Look, there's no sugarcoating it. If Miami wants to compete for a national title, which is the expectation in Coral Gables in the Miami, Florida area, you have to have a better defense. 30 points per game given up in the ACC is just not good enough. Giving up over 360 yards per game is not good enough either. They got torched against Syracuse. They got torched against Georgia Tech on the ground. Particularly, they got torched in the air against Syracuse. This is a defense that struggled across the board, and it's inexcusable for a top-level program. Guidry's gone, and that makes a lot of sense. You got to fire him. They had some really talented players that they lose in this upcoming season. We're going to talk about the depth chart in a minute, and they're losing a lot of talent that was very productive and that just could not get enough out of them. This is a defense that got run over and over again. The schedule is not, that much easier this upcoming season. This is a defense that's going to have to figure it out if this team has any sort of aspirations of competing in the ACC or for a college football playoff spot. You bring in a defensive coordinator here that I think has some solid starts in his career. Probably the most notable defense he worked on was in James Madison in 2019, which went to the national championship game. They fell just short in that one. The FCS national championship game, that is, was really solid as a coach there, was solid at Rutgers, the linebackers, developing some really talented players. The defense for Minnesota was really good this past year, a top 10 defense, a really physical unit that got the best out of their players, particularly on the defensive line and at linebacker. Some really strong showings from that team this year. He's been all over the place, coached, at Division II level, low Division I level, FCS level, all over the place. So this is a guy that's been around the sport. He's someone that's developing and continuing to turn into a really good coach in this sort of in this game here in football. He was, assistant coach of the year in 2021 while still at James Madison. So a guy with a really solid track record that you plug in that could really help. They added some transfers, especially in the secondary, where they really beefed up a unit that had some issues at times as well last year, particularly in that Syracuse game. They got torched over and over again through the air, and it was really unacceptable for this defense. Can this team turn it around? I think they're starting to make big moves here. You kind of got to make things happen because this team, they want to contend, right? They want to compete for a national title. I keep saying that, but the defense is holding them back. It's a major liability for this team.
Yeah, and this is a guy that was also the 2021 Assistant Coach of the Year at the FCS level for James Madison. So he's grinded things out. Like he said, he's coached at some incredibly low levels of, collegiate ball, and he's worked his way all the way up. So this is a guy who's going to be incredibly gritty. He's going to come in here. I think he's certainly going to look to implement that aggressive approach, and it should be beneficial for them. Last year, obviously, the secondary struggled big time as well, but the defensive line was vastly underwhelming, and of course, that led the rest of the defense to really falter because the defense was incredibly young. We figured they weren't going to be all that great, but they didn't have any help from what should have been a phenomenal defensive line. So like you said, we're going to move to this depth chart. We're going to take a look at some of the positional groups. and displays our confidence level really with this defense. We're going to start up front. Ruben Bain, of course, is going to be the headliner. He's been an elite player rushing the passer, really took his run defense level up a notch last season. He battled injuries, though, only played 9 games, 5.5 TFL, 3.5 sacks after, monstrous numbers in his freshman season where he had over 12 tackles for loss and 7.5 sacks in his debut year in 2023. He's going to be the big-time player for them. He can play the edge, move him on the inside as well. He's one of the top talents in college football on the defensive side of the ball. You have, Akeem Mesidor coming back. Good aggression to fight off blocks, athletic ability to really stunt effectively. Showed good power to bull rush as well. I think this is an underrated player who also, a couple years ago he battled injuries. 2023 battled injuries, came back last year, led them with 9 tackles for loss, had 5.5 sacks as well. So they have a good starting point with some of these players. The rest of the room, Armando Blunt, barely played, but he's the next top 40 recruit. A guy with great twitch and power. Pretty flexible player with good energy. Malik Bryant was good early on in the year versus lesser competition, so promising potential with him. Hayden Lowe's an incoming 5-star off the edge from California. So you like to think that he'll get on the field a good bit this year and potentially be able to make an impact. And then on the interior, Justin Scott, 300-pounder, was a good piece in his limited snaps. Ahmad Moten also was really good as a run defender, 325 pounds. He had 300 snaps of his own. So this defensive line right now seems like it's pretty impressive. Depth isn't as great. They did pick up a transfer in David Blay as well. Depth might be tested a little bit, Nick, but in terms of these starters and what they have on the interior and the potential coming off the edge, I think it's pretty good. And I think that aggressive philosophy of stopping the run should be obtained with these guys.
I think Mesidor is a really key player you return on this defensive line. He's a guy that's really solid coming off that left side of the edge. Really solid pass rusher. Had a solid season last year. 32 total tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. He's a guy that's going to be a big difference maker. I like the size and speed of him. I think he's a big key for this defensive line. Ruben Bain's a guy that you expect a lot out of this year. He's going to probably slot in there at defensive tackle in the interior. A guy that's also very physical, a really big key physical piece. 23 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks last year. Adding a lot there. Ahmad Moten is a really solid player that returns 18 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and a sack for him. I think he's a good player. And then Justin Scott was in rotational reps last year. He was a guy that, you didn't get a whole lot out of him, but I think he's a player that can continue to develop for this team. He had 7 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack last year. So a guy in limited snaps that got some solid reps in Justin Scott. I think you could move him in there on the left side and really be solid. I think you added some decent pieces, some smaller pieces out of the portal that could really add for this team. Overall, this is a defensive line that's got to be better, right? They got to be better against the run, have to clog the trenches here and get pressure from Mesidor off the left side of the edge. I want to see his sack number certainly go up this year. I want to see him blitz a little bit more potentially, put some pressure on the quarterback. I want to see what he can do. Good footwork, nice hands. Got to find a way just to wrap up the quarterback and get a couple extra sacks this year.
Yeah, David Blay, he led LA Tech with 10.5 TFLs, 6.5 sacks. He's 6'4", 300-plus pounds. They added 5 guys out of the portal last year on the defensive line. I mean, they were incredibly deep. And again, that's why they were just ultra disappointing overall. But Blay's a very respectable addition from the Bulldogs. So I think this is a good defensive line overall. I like the versatility they have. Some of the younger cats I think will be able to step up and make some big plays for them. Moving to the middle of the defense, though, this is where things get a little bit more concerning. Francisco Malagoa, he's going to be deep. He departs, of course, as the alpha dog of this defense the last 2 years. The guy that's going to have to replace him in that role is Wesley Bethune. This is a guy who's been a great run defender, was really good in coverage as well. I was very happy of how he improved last season. He's going to have to boost his production. It should double this season now that he's going to be that top linebacker for them. But Santhi in the middle, Nick, a Miami native, he's going to have to become that alpha dog for this defense, and the traits certainly seem to be there. He needs to continue to add on size, as does the rest of this room. Really not that big. Raul, that is, will be the other starting linebacker, it appears. He's only 233 pounds, still getting built out, though. Has good closing burst and instincts. He was good in his near 200 snaps. Should really step up. But after that, depth's going to be tested. Chase Smith enters his 5th year on roster with limited time, so he's not going to be expected to do too much. Cam Pruitt is a second-year guy. Was a 4-star coming out of high school. Only 200 pounds on him as well as of last season, so he's also going to need to bulk up big time. And then they have a 4-star true freshman in Keelan Wiley, who's probably going to be tasked with playing a big role. Pretty gloomy linebacking room here, Nick. Those are the only guys we're really seeing right now, and size is a bit of an issue.
Yeah, this is certainly a linebacking core that's got some issues there. You highlighted a guy up the top who's got to really be a big key maker, difference maker for this defense in the middle there. Biznante is a really solid player, but he's got to be better. 59 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. He's taking over the bulk. Malaga, you're losing 100 tackles roughly there, plus 11 tackles for loss from him. That's a big loss. You got to find a way to get that production here. Got to try and double your tackles, really, and double your tackles for loss from your leading linebacker. I think this year is sort of an expectation that you would want to have if you're a Miami fan. When I think the deeper down Chase Smith and Cameron Pruitt, these are two guys that are solid, but not a whole lot of production. Pruitt, the younger guy, should get some more reps this year. 11 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a pick for him. While Chase Smith's a veteran player that's got some good looks, 13 total tackles. You rattled off some other names there that were solid for this linebacking core. It's a shallow unit, though, right? They got to be solid, the heartbeat of the defense. They had issues against the run last year as well. They were not so polished in that department. They got to be good in coverage as well. I worry about this linebacking core. It's good that the coach coming in has experience coaching linebackers. You know, at the previous 2 stops, he was a linebackers coach at Minnesota while being the defensive play caller and also the linebackers coach full-time at Rutgers for 2 years. So he has experience doing that, which I think is a big key in the right direction when your defensive coordinator has experience is working with a position group that needs the most work on the roster. Can he get the most out of these guys? That's a big key question.
Now we move to a secondary where on the stat sheet they weren't all that bad. You had 14 interceptions, allowed a 58% comp rating. But throughout the year, especially in conference play, these guys were just not good. You've seen it in games like against Duke, Syracuse was bad, Iowa State was even worse. Periodically throughout the year, this was just bad. Cal had almost 300 yards on only 12 completions. So a whole lot of bad. And the 14 interceptions they had, most of that came over the first 6 games of the year. Back half of the season, not as much. They did have 3 against Duke, though, in that game, where a little bit of good came of bad as well. They went out and they revamped this part completely. We alluded to 5 guys they picked up in the transfer portal. We'll go ahead and start with those guys. The top one's going to be safety, Zachariah Poyser from Jacksonville State. A versatile player. Played more deep safety late in the year, but he played a lot of box and in the slot mainly throughout the season. Lots of ball production. He's an athletic player. Really fires downhill with some good instincts. I think this is a great playmaker here. Really like what Poyser brings to the table. He was a highly coveted safety. Miami was able to get him. You look at some of the other guys. Xavier Lucas, 200 snaps. He was impressive as a freshman for Wisconsin. He's going to compete at corner. Emmanuel Carnley wasn't that great in his redshirt freshman season. 6'3", though, 4-star from the state of California. He played at Arizona last fall. Ethan O'Connor really struggled early on in the season, but he was elite in the back half for Washington State. 5 of the last 6 games of the year. He allowed less than 20 yards in coverage. Very impressive. Is a tad undersized. Was very good versus the run, though. He's an aggressive player. He did have 7 flags, so certainly things that can be coached out of him, but that's a high upside player, it appears, coming from the Palouse. And then Charles Brantley, a 4-year player coming off his best season yet for Michigan State. Only had 255 snaps in coverage, but he was locked down. I expect him to potentially play a same role where he can be a rotational player. It might even be the starting slot for them as well. What do you make of some of these ads they picked up in the transfer portal, Nick? We'll talk about some of the returnees they have as well. Young unit last year, and they were just no good. I'm shocked the stats aren't even worse. It just seems like big play after big play was being allowed. They were just not that good.
Yeah, I think Poyser's a really solid ad from Jack State. A guy that's from the state of Florida. They return, bring him in after starting his freshman year at Jack State in Alabama. He's a really talented player. 6'2", 190, 77 total tackles this past season. 2 fumble recoveries, 3 picks for him, 8 pass breakups. Good numbers. This is a guy that's high upside, a younger player, got really good reps as a true freshman playing at Jack State. Now jumps up to the next level. Really a good ad in the transfer portal. And Ethan O'Connor, another freshman who had some reps that got a lot better in the second half of the season. 6'1", 170 for him. He got a lot better as the season went on, right? He had definitely a weaker start to his year. But overall, things got better in the back half of the season. Was recording, 3-4 tackles a game over the last couple of stretch. Had a really good game against San Diego State in a win for Wazoo and was really solid in that matchup. This is a guy that I think has high upside as well. 32 total tackles for him this past year. 4 interceptions, 8 pass breakups. So another good coverage asset that you can really work with here. I think it's a really good ad. Some of the other pieces they added were solid as well. But I think when you have those 2 guys, I think O'Connor will be a really solid player. You probably start him out on the right side of the defense, right cornerback, and then Poyser is a really good safety. You can move him around in different spots. It complements some of the returning production this team has. I like the secondary ads. I think they're underrated and solid ads out of the portal.
And now looking at some of the guys they do return, as a true freshman, O.J. Frederic, he was great. This is a guy that actually was pretty consistent on his side of the field. I think they're going to expect more out of him as well. 30 tackles. He had a pick last year, 7 pass breakups. So pretty consistent effort from him. The rest of the group was just abysmal, though, and 2 guys depart. Well, one guy that is Daryl Porter. He was the full-time slot. He allowed more yards than Jedias Richard, who gave up 400 plus. This is a guy out of Vanderbilt they expected to really be, a high riser. And so far in his Miami career, he has not been a consistent player. He's probably going to get buried on the depth chart. Porter, though, he does depart, so that's going to be a wide open competition at the slot. There's just a lot of inconsistencies, and obviously safety, that was a position of revampment last year. They lost two of those guys to the league, so a lot of revampment has happened across the board. I'm glad that Cristobal has paid attention to this secondary, and he knows he has to go out there and beef up the talent, and that's what they did. I really like some of the guys they've brought in. Brantley being a veteran. Poyser, of course, seems like he has a lead upside, and O'Connor, he was just phenomenal last year. He was highly coveted. Guys on the West Coast like USC wanted him, and Miami was able to get him. So great opportunities here with what they've been able to do in terms of recruiting. Saquon Patterson at safety, he's also a rising sophomore. So a lot of young guys here that played periodically throughout the year, and the Damari Brown to redshirt sophomore. So again, Nick, a lot of youth mixed in with some of these transfers here, and that's one thing that's still kind of a theme, even with a lot of the transfers, is a lot of youth here. So I think they're not building not just for 2025, but the future as well, that they can certainly have some pieces they can plug in here and establish to potentially make them one of the top secondaries in college football moving forward.
Extremely youthful team, certainly, which is concerning if you're a Canes fan, but I think this is a secondary that's getting some solid players back, and they added some key pieces. They went out and attacked it. They brought in some transfers, which they needed to do, right? That was something that we worried about with this team. They bring back some guys here, and Patterson and Federico, I think, are two players that could be solid. For Federico, you rattled off his stats. He had a solid season at times. Patterson, I thought, was high upside, was developing as a prospect, as a player for this team. 19 total tackles and 3 pass breakups for him, looking to get an interception this year, hopefully bringing in some development. This is a team that they're hoping can find a way to develop in the secondary. It's a young unit, right? The coaching certainly have to be high on this team. They have to try and avoid mistakes at all costs, cut down on costly penalties, keep your man in front of you, do not get beat. I like what they have at cornerback, and the two cornerbacks are really solid. Safety, I think they have some high upside as well. I think Patterson could develop and continue to develop into a really solid player. Most likely going to be the starting safety alongside Poyser when this is all said and done and kicked off in late August. I think this is a secondary that's got some room for improvement. They added some decent pieces, 2 solid transfers that should start day one as sophomores out of the portal that are high upside guys that could really develop and turn into stars for this team.
Final verdict on this defense won't come until the summer when we do our full prediction for them, but I think the expectation right now is they're going to improve. They're going to impress. I'm certainly worried about the linebacking group, especially since this scheme really is going to be predicated on the backers stepping up immensely. But I think this defensive line, they're good players. They're capable of doing heavy lifting. We didn't see that last year, but I think with some new coaching in store, a new scheme could certainly benefit that. And we just talked about the secondary, and I think that's going to be a very impressive group. Can potentially set themselves up to be one of the best in CFB in 2026. So a lot to like here, Nick. I like what Miami's went out and did. It's unfortunate the defense costed them a CFP spot, because I would have loved to see that quarterback and Cam Ward and that offense compete for a national title. It would have been very exciting to watch, and unfortunately we're costed that opportunity.
Yeah, this is a defense I think has to be better this year. The schedule has some tough matchups. They play Notre Dame opening weekend at Hard Rock Stadium. What will that offense look like? Can they get tested there? They got to play Florida as well at the end of September. That's an offense that's going to be really solid. They have a great quarterback, DJ Lagway. Got to play Louisville and SMU, two teams that are going to have some high-flying offenses. Syracuse, that offense could still be really productive, and Pitt later in the year. The ACC finale for them, an offense that I expect to be a really solid unit again this year. Some tough tests on the horizon for this Canes defense. They got to be stronger here. This is a team that on paper should contend in the ACC, which seems to be a wide open conference right now. Can they find a way to develop and build this talent up to be competitive towards the end of the season? That's something I'm keeping my eye on.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.